I'm not sure what you have in mind in terms of what you want to discuss or kind of get out of me. My name is Sama Fabian, and I'm a yoga teacher and a craniosacral therapist, and I also work with shamanism, with core shamanism exactly. But, the word itself, the word shaman, means the one who sees through the darkness. And shamanism is the most ancient known tradition to man. It started, records go back 40,000 odd years. My feel is that it's the first recorded or visible evidence of human beings trying to understand the world they live in and the nature they had to contend with, and the spirits and the living creatures and spirits who occupy that space in order to find their own place within that circle of life. So they derived... What's interesting in shamanism is that in all the cultures, whether it is from far deep Australia or Native American cultures or places like Mongolia, Africa, there are core shamanic practices between cultures who have never really met each other, or now they have, of course, but in this day and age of communication, but up to not very long ago, these cultures had no connection between each other. And what has been discovered is that there are core practices that are common to all shamanic practices. So we can safely say it's a human endeavor, and it's a human aspiration to understand the world we live in and how to find our place within that circle of life. I'd say I've always been interested in shamanism, maybe before even I knew the word shaman itself. I was always fascinated by anthropological programs on TV when I was a kid, and history. My history teacher was a very good teacher, and I was lucky enough to be introduced to the Egyptian Book of the Dead within the context of a history class. So all this symbolism, iconography, and also the depiction of the elements, nature, wilderness, and the powers within that always fascinated me. So before I ever knew the word shaman, shamanism is in the background of my inquiry always, because the forces of nature and basically the spiritual forces of nature. While that political background, strong political background in my family, I'd say were more the lead towards my yoga practice. They took me to yoga in many ways. I found yoga maybe not because of that background, but surely because that background gave me a certain non-conformist view of life and relation dynamics in society. And so what was a political question became a spiritual quest in some ways, I guess. I'm Spanish, from Madrid, born in Madrid, from urban working class parents. My grandparents, my mother's side, were very, very strongly politicized people. Although they were not highly educated, they were working class people, but they had a very strong sense of justice and humanism, let's say, of humankind. They believed in equality. They had loads of beautiful ideals. And I never met my grandfather, but I was fortunate enough to have a long period of my life until I was my early adulthood with my grandmother. And to this day, I consider her my guru, because more than a political person, she was essentially a humanist, and she loved people, always helpful to people. She saved many people's lives during the Spanish Civil War, and after the war she was a very resourceful, very strong woman and very resilient. So she found solutions for neighbors, helped find their husbands who had been put into prison. She was a freedom fighter, and I have a huge respect for her. And I think she gave me, she passed on to me what I experience as a vital strength, and also a sense of fearlessness, of not being intimidated, and of following what my heart says first and foremost, and then my brain afterwards to try and make the correct decisions. So that's a little bit the political background with my grandmother. The way she embodied those principles, she was a very highly principled woman, was really by acting. It was in her actions. She was an analphabet. She couldn't read or write, so it's not like she read loads of books about communism or socialism or internationalism in any way. But there was something that she figured for herself, is that solidarity is better than aloneness, than isolation. Helping your neighbors is better than seeing them suffer. And being generous and having your door open and enough food for the possible guest was always there in my childhood, and that I recognized and respected hugely. And I'm grateful to have received those values. When my parents, young couple, decided to move out of Madrid, my parents were not political refugees. My grandmother was. My parents were economic migrants. But because of fascist Spain, and because of the way their own values and the way they wanted to lead their lives and raise their children, they couldn't stay in Spain really during that time of dictatorship. So we all moved to France, to Toulouse, and that's where I grew up. And during that time, my grandmother, who was very connected to the Spanish Communist Party, which was now underground, of course, there was quite a lot of political refugees flooding into southern France in particular. And so she set up a group of friends. They were friends, basically. They knew each other. And particularly someone in my childhood who really informed the way I view health. He was a doctor, Dr. Varsoni. He was a beautiful, beautiful soul. And he would come, when we were ill as children, he would come and sit with my parents and chat with them, and my parents would make him coffee. It was very convivial, a good family doctor, and a good counsel for parents and people in general. A very full of hearted person, and really caring. And so, there would be wonderful meetings sometimes, of these political refugees all from Spain, and discussing the spirit of freedom and the spirit of collaboration and being together and setting up projects for children, for women who'd lost their husbands, widows, a whole bunch of stuff, which I didn't at the time understand. I was very small. But, I was under the table kind of moving about as a child, and the feeling in my heart was one of a fascination, adoration for my grandmother and the people around her, and the sort of festive feeling. There was a sense of, there wasn't a lot at home, but whatever was there was shared. And that sense of, we can share that little bit of good wine that we have, we can share that little bit of, cocido madrileño, a little bit of meat and chickpeas and rice. You're very basic, but good homemade food. And that was I remember those meetings have been very inspiring and very full of joy and full of positivity and hope for the future. And I knew, me and my sister knew already then that we embodied the hope that they had for the future. So they invested in us. They invested in our education. They gave us so much love and welcomed us as we were, and that I'm grateful, forever grateful. It was a good inheritance, I would say. It's actually, I think, very serendipitous. I was at the time in a Tibetan Buddhist school center, which is in Lavore, near my hometown in Toulouse. And I was a sadhu, I was traveling, I had no money, I had nothing. I'd already encountered yoga. And I was invited to, well, I wasn't invited, I went into the kitchens of this Tibetan monastery in south of France and said to them, look, please have me, I have no money, I'm hungry, and I'll clean the toilets, I do whatever I need to do, but please can I spend some time here? And I had a little tent and a sleeping bag, and that was about the size of it. And so they said, yes, by all means. They invited me in, gave me some food, and said to me, look, help in the kitchen. That would be your karma yoga, you help in the kitchen. So for a few weeks I helped in the kitchen. And suddenly there was all this commotion. And Lama Zopa was coming to the monastery. Wow, Lama Zopa. And he was coming to give initiation. And I was delighted, I was really excited. And then I realized, or I was made to realize, that I could not see Lama Zopa because I had never seen the Dalai Lama, and I'd never received the initiation that it is to actually be in his presence. So I was not invited to meet Lama Zopa. So initially, as a young seeker, spiritual seeker, I felt excluded, which I had many experiences of exclusion. So I felt a little bit disconcerted, and there was a sway in my body. And I thought, I didn't feel pain, but I felt excluded. And I thought, okay, always summoned, let's say, prayed for the spirit of my grandmother to come into me and help me. She's always watching my back. And she always said to me, don't worry, it's fine. Just keep your center, keep your strength. I'm here for you. It's okay. So I decided that it was okay. And the day Lama Zopa came to give the initiation was quite extraordinary. Because everybody was in the big hall, and it was beautiful pujas and things. And I was outside, and I went into the garden, the vegetable garden. And there I had the most beautiful encounter with the little lama who was in charge of the kitchen. And it was the tiniest little Tibetan man. And he was in his robes, and he had an apron, and he had a little basket, and he was collecting veg and preparing and stuff. And we looked up at each other, and I realized, oh my gosh, he's not there either. He's not with a big crowd, doing all this amazing initiations and amazing things. He's out here in the garden having a very quiet time. And so he looked at me and gave me this smile, which was so gorgeously beautiful. I thought, that's my initiation. I'll have that. And I hold that moment in my heart ever since. It was I felt included. And then the next day, I went to the nunnery, because there was a place for the men and a place for the women. And I went to the nunnery and I met this English nun, Buddhist nun, and I was kind of looking for the next step. And she said to me, "Oh, why don't you go to Greenham Common? It's, with your political background, the freedom fighting women circling around a nuclear base, an American nuclear base in Newbury, UK. And she said, I can give you the keys of my house in Cornwall. You can go there and then make your way, hitchhike, make your way to Greenham Common." And so I did. And that's how I landed in the UK. Everything stands out, Les. Every single moment is a moment of receiving something very profound that changes the life. It's almost like very difficult to make choices. There were periods of time where the experience was so dense. It was almost like every day there was a wave to kind of receive this wave of experience, and what I now can safely kind of qualify as occult, as given through mysteriously, I guess, through occult teachers, meaning that they were not in the field like you and me now, that, receiving an initiation from a guru, from a particular tradition being passed on, some kind of initiation that always was not available to me. Not that I didn't value it, or even a couple of times even attempted to bring myself into some sangha of some sort. One is isolated and it's difficult to be on one's own, but that was never made available. So what I received was always through a very strong aspiration from my heart, and I guess the descent of some kind of spiritual teaching, wherefrom I'm not sure. Some I had the privilege to sense who they might have been. There was at one time a Tibetan teacher, that is for sure, who was in my field for 2-3 years, and that was quite determining of the choices I made at those times. Incidentally, one book that accompanied me throughout all those about 10 years of, I call it my spiritual university, because I never went to university, was the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And so that connection with Tibet, but not so much Buddhist Tibet, but I always, whatever I receive seems to be on the cusp of the ancient Bon tradition, which is very shamanic, and the new Tibetan Buddhism. The same with Celtic law. I was always between paganism and early Christianity. The same with also Islam, always this receiving exquisite teachings from Islamic traditions, more on the Sufi side, but never completely the new Islam, which is much more. So I understand. I wouldn't say I'm a specialist, but so I understand much more formal and maybe boundaried and framed, let's say. So always the traditions always came to me, what I understood as their own moment of shift from one very native and very raw local law to a more kind of systematized spiritual tradition. And I often place my own understanding of my own evolution spiritually within that cusp, let's say. I would say no, not here nor there. Always in between, in betwixt, in a place of which is very flexible, very mobile, an unfixed place, unfixed. So it's not so much acquisition of methodologies or practices or things that are already there in place, but rather how does that technique resonate in me, and keeping records of that resonance. And that is going to be my practice from now on. So it's very creative, although of course the lineage is humanity, I guess, because there's so many beautiful things in all traditions. To tell you the truth, my political life or engagement was... I have a very strong political awareness. I am interested. For me, politics is simply the way humanity organizes itself, the life. You know, it is the organization of human life. So that is of interest to me. I have a keen political interest. I don't do politics because I don't take sides. I'm not interested in the political debate in the way it is carried out these days. So consequently, I don't vote because I don't see the point. Not so much that I don't see the point, is that I don't believe in voting as a true democratic tool, because whatever my opinion is, I don't think is relevant to anybody in the political sphere at this point in time. That said, I respect people who do vote, and I support them, but I don't feel compelled to do that. So the answer to that is no, my life is a spiritual life, and I've dedicated myself to the spiritual life from the moment I recognized that is what was happening. I'm very grateful for this question, because I think there is a similarity, or at least in the intention, as you said, in communism, to share, to create cooperation in life, to value things like solidarity, justice, equality, food for all according to their needs. All of those things that I think are very humanistic, really. And in my personal trajectory, when I think of my grandmother, she was already embodying all of those values. And I always say, as a little joke to myself, I couldn't have gone any further into the political realm, let's say. The most radical thing, in order to, I would say, even honor my grandmother's legacy, is to go into the spiritual life. It's the most subversive thing I think we can do today, is actually practice spirituality, practice yoga, since that is the path that chose me, I would say, because I didn't choose it. It just came upon me and I just said yes. I surrendered to it. But I would say I've always practiced yoga as a means to subvert the status quo of our current civilization, which is based on greed, individualism, self-promotion, and egotistic endeavors that, without any regard to other people's conditions and the condition of the world and the land and the animals, all of it, really. So to me, there is a political consequence of spiritual practice. It's a very interesting question, and the way, where do I see humanity going right now is right into a massive brick wall. That's the way I see it. Nevertheless, I believe in the victory of spiritual forces, and I think we're going through a tremendous transition where we can actually help our evolutionary process, let's say, because we've come to perhaps a maturation in our human consciousness. So I think the forces of positivity, it's not even positivity like that. I think that might be a bit simplistic like that. I would say forces of life, life-promoting forces, will overcome the current kind of life-negating forces which are in power right now. But I think it's bound to be painful, like all transitions, and that's fine. We seem, as humankind, to learn a lot through pain, almost exclusively through pain. So, but I have huge hope for the future. I think my strategy would be to attempt to feed the current status quo as little as I can, and to not so much fight against it, which would be a political stance, a political posture, but rather to withdraw my energies away from that which I see as running into a brick wall and very damaging for ourselves, for the planet, for the children, for the future, and pull my energies into nourishing, nurturing, supporting everything that is life-promoting, in as much as my consciousness allows me to. I don't have the whole picture, I wouldn't pretend to do, but in as much as I can grow on a daily basis and see where my mistakes are and adjust myself without guilt. I don't do guilt very well because I was never taught guilt. I was fortunate not to have to go through the ritual passage of many Spanish people of going through the Catholic Church and learn to be guilty. Guilty wasn't transmitted to me. Values were, but not guilt. So typically, if and when I see a mistake that I've done, I will own it. My practice would be own that. Just don't go into denial. Own that. It is a mistake. Okay. Forgive yourself instantly and make it an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to become more wholesome, an opportunity to rise and above the situation and not indulge in your egotistic, self-indulgent self-pity or pride, and just get over yourself, nice and gently, without harshness either, but move on and see what Spirit says, and let yourself be guided always. I think that's enough.